Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth railed against so-called, quote, woke culture in a speech to America's top generals, laying out new standards for the military. In the same meeting, Trump told Pentagon leaders to, quote, handle the enemy from within, justifying domestic military action and framing U.S. cities as training grounds.
This is arguably the most important and the most frightening meeting the American military has held outside of wartime. It is truly frightening. You know, whenever you think the threat to our democracy could not become worse, it becomes worse. It's hard to imagine a more clear and present danger to our democracy when you put together what Hegseth, the totally unqualified defense secretary, I guess they want to go back to call it the Department of War, like it was, you know, in the 19th century. But regardless, when you put together his comments with those of Donald Trump, it represents a truly unprecedented, dangerous, frightening intrusion in our democracy. As Sam indicated, what Hegseth says is forget everything else. Whatever, you know, I'm sure 90% of MAGAs don't know what woke means, but I'm not going to get into that. So forget about woke, forget about equality, forget about diversity. The military is going to be about only one thing. Lethality, defined as their sole mission, is going to be to kill people and to break things. You got that, Sam? That's their sole mission. Did he say anything about training them in law enforcement?
No.
Did he say anything about training them in crowd control?
No.
Not a darn thing. And this becomes incredibly important when I'm going to put together what Hegseth had to say with what Trump had to say. And, you know, there's been a lot of good analysis of each part of it, but I haven't yet seen a comprehensive analysis that puts the two things together. And we're going to do that right now. Okay, wow. So forget everything but lethality, killing people, and breaking things. Quote, we unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. None of this Geneva Convention human rights stuff. We untie the hands of our war fighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. Intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. All right, now put that together with who Trump defines as the enemy against whom this new lethal, unleashed military will be directed against. Does he talk about Russia, Sam?
No.
Does he talk about China?
No.
Does he talk about North Korea or Iran?
No.
No. Who does he talk about?
The enemy within.
The enemy within. Other Americans. You know where that phrase, the enemy within, came from, Sam?
Joseph McCarthy.
Joseph McCarthy. Exactly. The most notorious violator of civil liberties, humane norms, the rule of law, the Constitution. You know, he lives in infamy, and the last person you should be modeling it on. But here's what he said in his famous 1950 speech, in which he falsely claimed he had all this evidence of communist infiltration in the State Department. Just like Trump, McCarthy's claims are all built on the big lie. He said, when a great democracy is destroyed, it will not be because of enemies from without, but rather because of enemies from within. And that speech became known as the enemy within speech. And of all persons and all approaches to model yourself on in the 21st century, you would have to search far and wide, and I'm not sure you could do it, find any American worse than Joseph McCarthy. And there is a connection, by the way, between Trump and McCarthy. Do you know that, Sam?
Roy Cohn.
Roy Cohn. When Trump has been in trouble with the law for over 50 years. Somehow, some way, he has weaseled his way out of it and never been held accountable. He was first found by the U.S. Department of Justice to have violated the Fair Housing Act by discriminating against minorities in rental properties in his real estate company. And I looked at the evidence. It's in my book, The Case for Impeachment. It was incredibly strong. So who did he hire, Sam?
Cohn.
Roy Cohn, McCarthy's notorious red-baiting lawyer, whose motto was delay, deflect, obstruct, attack. And that's exactly what they did. And Trump got out of it, and that's been his MO since. So not only are we drawing here on the McCarthy precedent, but there is a very specific connection between Trump and McCarthy. So who's the enemy that Trump is talking about? If it's not China, Russia, North Korea, he said, last month I signed an executive order to provide training for a quick reaction force from the military, I add that can help quell civil disturbances. This is going to be a big thing for the people in this room. Who are the people in the room, Sam?
Military folk.
The military leaders, not sheriffs or police chiefs, but leaders of the U.S. military. This is going to be a big thing for the people in this room because it's the enemy from within. Thank you very much, Joe McCarthy. And we have to handle it before it gets out of control. It won't get out of control once you're involved. Further said, we're under invasion from within, no different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. At least when they're wearing a uniform, you can take them out. It's a war from within. He went on to say, where are we going to train these military in killing people and breaking things?
U.S. cities.
U.S. citizens. Not training them in crowd control or police tactics, but in punishing violence on the enemy with no rules of engagement. In U.S. cities with U.S. citizens, he said, he told Pete Hegseth that the U.S. should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military. Risa Brooks, you don't have to take my word for it. She's a Marquette University professor who is an authority on the relationship between the military and civil society. She warned that what's going on here is so dangerous because, quote, what's happening is part of a larger project aimed at promoting the military's partisan alignment with the administration. To the generals and admirals in attendance, it signals that overt ideological conformity with the administration is not just appropriate, but key to their career advancement and to protecting their units and commands, Brooks said. Trump said, quote, if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave the room. Of course, there goes your rank. There goes your future. Brooks comments that the ultimate aim here is that people will no longer expect the military to serve the public at large, but that its goal and purpose is to advance the interests of one faction or party in politics. Exactly the way every dictatorship in the history of the world has used the military, not to defend and protect us, but to defend and protect the partisan interests of the regime, even if it means unleashing the military to break and kill not foreign adversaries, but our own people within our own cities. Virginia Berger, a senior defense analyst at the Project on Government Oversight, said Who is the adversary? Who are we increasing lethality for? Is it China? Is it Russia? Or is it so they can exercise some degree of control over the American people? It's certainly in there if you read closely. This is really frightening. A very famous Asian sage said, quote, "In order to rally people, government needs enemies. And if they do not have a real enemy, they will invent one in order to mobilize us." There's no enemy from within destroying our country in our cities or anywhere else in America. Like so much else in this administration, it is a self-serving fabrication to enable him to achieve his goal of suppressing the rights and liberties of us, the American people. The great Siddhartha once said, "It is a man's own mind, not his enemy or foe, that lures him to evil ways." And that's exactly what we are seeing here. Now, this is also clearly not only fundamentally wrong, immoral, and dangerous, and contrary to the basic tenets of our democracy, it is also contrary to law. Do you know what law I'm talking about here, Sam?
No.
It's called the Posse Comitatus Act. And it was passed in the late 19th century in order to precisely avoid, not promote, the situation that Donald Trump is talking about, and that is the use of the military for domestic law enforcement, except in very special circumstances, which don't come close to existing here. The Posse Comitatus Act explicitly prohibits, you can check it out, it's just a one-line law, it expressly prohibits the use of the military for domestic law enforcement, precisely to avoid the kind of situation that Donald Trump is promoting today, and that is the use of the military against its own people, which Congress understood even back then was the royal road toward dictatorship, something we had shed our blood fighting a revolution against. We were fighting a revolution against a king, a despot. And that's a fundamental reason why they passed the Posse Comitatus law, and precisely why Trump is so intent on breaking it, since a critical element of authoritarianism is always the control of the military and the use of the military to terrorize its own people. I repeat, to terrorize its own people. There were also a slew of lies in Trump's speech. Of course, he digressed into all kinds of things. He said, "We have the strongest military in the world." Quote, "You never heard Biden say that." Biden said that numerous times. For example, in 2023, he said, "Our U.S. military," and this is not hyperbole, I've said it for the last 2 years, "is the strongest military in the history of the world." Not just the strongest in the world, in the history of the world. You know, Trump doesn't care that his lies can be directly, immediately, and easily refuted by public available information. It absolutely does not matter one whit to him. He also lied about how much money we gave to Ukraine, saying it's $350 billion when it's well under half of that. He lied about his ramping up the spending of NATO in his first term. He said he settled 7 wars. At least 3 or 4 of those claims are blatantly false, and others are extremely shaky. He claims Congo and Venezuela are sending us the remnants of their prisons and asylums. Absolutely no evidence to that effect. He claimed that 25 million migrants entered the country under Biden. In fact, throughout the Biden term, the federal government recorded under 11 million nationwide encounters with migrants, well under half the number. And that's not the full account either, since a great many of those were rapidly and immediately expelled from the country. The so-called getaways, as estimated by House Republicans, was roughly 2.2 million, nowhere near the 25 million that Trump claimed. And of course, he repeated his usual lie about the 2020 election being rigged, claiming Russia would never have invaded Ukraine if the election wasn't rigged. Of course, he told us once you elected him, he would solve the Ukraine war in one day. I don't know how many days we've gone, but probably more than 250, and we're nowhere near solving the Ukraine war. But I cannot tell you how dangerous it is to provoke and establish a military designed to kill without restraint, to break things without restraint, to be unleashed, and unleashing it on your own people for fabricated reasons. There is no crisis in our cities that requires the use of the military. Mayors and governors are not asking for it. In fact, they are fundamentally rejecting it. But now we have the building of this rapid deployment force of military personnel in violation of the Posse Comitatus law, in violation of the preservation of our democracy, directed against our own people. Nothing could be more frightening.
You know, I didn't think about it like that in terms of, not, you know, what Hegseth was saying and what Trump was saying and putting those together.
Nobody has.
I was sort of thinking about them as both kind of crazy in their own right. But when you put them together, that's pretty frightening. Hey, we're going to create this kill at all costs, break things military. Oh, also, we're pointing at within.
Right.
That's pretty frightening.
Yes.
You know, it's sad because I feel like the American public after Vietnam, after failed wars in the Middle East, it felt like we were finally maybe going to come out of this militarized military industrial complex way of thinking about things. But it seems like this administration is trying to do the opposite. They're trying to make it more lethal, more brutal.
Which is the opposite of what they said. They criticized these wars. They criticized the militarization.
And I feel like, again, we've learned so much from Vietnam to now, and they're just erasing all that the American people have learned about war and how war is hell. War is, when you talk to people who have served, when you talk to people who have been in action, I mean, it's literal hell on earth. And the fact that somehow we're erasing all those lessons and going back to, you know, an Attila the Hun style, kill at all costs, break things at all costs.
But directed against us.
Right, that too, right.
It's bad enough if you're doing it for foreign wars. It's so much worse when you're directing it against your own people.
You know, another thing Hegseth was railing on about was military standards and making sure that all standards are male standards.
Yes, whatever that means.
Whatever that means exactly. And what is an 18-year-old expected to have the same standards as a 45-year-old who's still serving? Yeah, none of that makes sense.
It's all totally muddled. But and he says, well, but I'm not really, you know, denigrating the role of women in the military. Of course you are.
Of course he is, yeah.
This is the same guy who posted and praised a video by this far-right white nationalist, white Christian nationalist pastor who advocated ending the voting rights for women. He said vote should be by household and should be cast by the male head of household. And this is a video that Hegseth posted and praised. And you were going to have us believe that he really believes in equality for women?
And the interesting thing is, as of 2023, there was 225,000 women in U.S. active duty military. So it seems like if he wants the best force in the world, a lot of that is including women just for the sake of numbers, right? So if he's going to eliminate hundreds of thousands of personnel from our military. Wouldn't that weaken our military?
This is the big lie also about diversity, equity, inclusion, affirmative action. The big lie is this is designed to let unqualified people into business or schools or the military. Thanks for watching our video. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a member today.